are live.
Okay. Well, again, welcome to the Joint Information Technology Oversight Committee meeting for August 11. I'd like to start by just having the committee members who are here and who are also online introduce themselves, starting with Senator Chittenden.
Thank you. So Tom Chittenden from Chittenden County Senate District. I work at UVM and I'm really excited to be here on Jitoc.
Seth Chase, Primary Committees, House Energy and Technology. I'm from Colchester.
And Representative Chase is the committee's vice chair. I'm Senator Randy Bragg from Franklin County and part of Grand Isle County.
Laura Sibilia from Dover and on Energy and Technology.
I'm Marty Feltis from Linden, and I'm on House Appropriations.
And do we have any members who are joining us remotely on Zoom today?
Good morning, Senator Chris Pearson from Chittenden. Nice to be with you.
Thank you. Today we have an agenda, and the principal items on today's agenda are dealing with a couple of items that the General Assembly has asked us to oversee and to provide, in effect, a funding okay to a couple of project plans. And we'd like to start out by dealing with that. The first item today is a statutory review of the Department of Labor's proposal in statute. And Secretary Quinn, I understand, is going to be presenting for the Agency of Digital Services, and also Commissioner Harrington of the Department of Labor is also here with us today. So however you folks want to do it.
Sure, I'd ask that Deputy Secretary Sean Naylor be added to the list. Deputy Secretary has been deeply involved in the Department of Labor throughout the pandemic and has been assisting with the planning for that.
Right, and he is on the agenda today, as is Dan Smith, the consultant from the Joint Fiscal Office, and Cameron Wood, the director of the Unemployment Insurance Division, in addition to Commissioner Harrington. So, Secretary, would you like to, or would you like Deputy Secretary Naylor to come up?
I'm going to have Deputy Secretary Naylor come up with me and get the project overview.
Okay.
We'll go from there.
Good. I think it'd be helpful first, for the record, after you folks identify yourselves, to tell us what the legislative mandate is and what the committee is required to do, and then address your issues.
For this specific project?
Correct.
All right.
For this specific project.
So I'm John Quinn. I'm the Secretary of Digital Services and the State CIO, for the record.
And I'm Sean Naylor, Deputy Secretary of the Agency of Digital Services, for the record.
Thank you.
Right. So Jitoc's responsibility and authority here is to approve funding, the release of funding for the first phase of the Department of Labor UI modernization, unemployment insurance modernization. That project is approximately $3.5 million. It will span 12 to 15 months.
I'll give a brief overview of what phase one looks like. So we have identified the modernization of the unemployment insurance systems to be 4 phases currently. What we've sought funding for is phase one. Phase one encompasses the replacement of, in essence, the public-facing pieces for claimants and employers. Those systems utilizing Salesforce, which is a technology platform that the state has used successfully over the last couple of years, and will allow for a consistent experience for Vermonters through there. One thing that I'd like to kind of add on phase one is that none of the technology that we're implementing is new or untested. The technology, Salesforce specifically, was used for initial applicants during the pandemic once we realized that the current infrastructure we had was inadequate. And so it's already in place for all new claimants coming into the unemployment system up until we took it offline due to all the fraud attempts, and have been putting in place measures to ensure to minimize those fraud attempts currently. It's used to administer the pandemic unemployment assistance program. It is currently being used also for the Vermont Department of Health for the vaccine registration, testing registration system. And so we have had experience in the last 18 months of hundreds of thousands of successful interactions with Vermonters through those systems to use Salesforce. What we're looking at doing in phase one is to take some of the functionality that currently exists in outdated websites, things like weekly certifications, the ability to provide documentation on claims, those types of things, roll those into and improve what was done for the pandemic, and then also replace the aging website that's there that and provide additional functionality for employers. So the phases 2, 3, and 4 are the replacement of the core system, or in essence, what currently falls within what people consider the mainframe. So the actual transaction processing on the mainframe falls in the subsequent phases.
Okay, Representative Sebelia, question?
Yeah, can you just clarify?
Yes.
You said we moved to the Salesforce platform, right? But we've taken that offline because of the fraud. And so what is the status now?
So what we're
And how do we mitigate the fraud issue?
So I'm not sure if you recall, but when we gave the presentation, I think 2 Jitoc meetings ago around the approach for phase one of the technologies that was kind of underneath was called Okta. What this does is allow for the authentication of users, and not to get too geeky, right? But what we're doing is putting in place measures to do remote identity proofing for users and also to manage those users.
Can you explain that term, please? Remote identity
So
proofing? Is that what you said?
yeah, so it's the ability to utilize services that are available that allow with a higher confidence to know that if Sean Naylor is making a claim that I am Sean Naylor. And so those systems will come from vendors like LexisNexis and others. And we have been in the process of doing an RFP to select that vendor for those services to implement. What that will allow is you may have seen it in maybe some of your banking transactions. It would look something like where when you log in, it prompts you for things like, did you ever have a vehicle, vehicle this age and this color registered with the state of Vermont? So it's services like that that help get past the syndicates that are doing fraud at a large scale and helps to ensure so that's what we've taken it offline and never.
And we've used those services at the Department of Human Services as well, and been successful with those technologies.
In other words, you're using data that the state already has about an individual and gathering it and using it as in effect test data to that an individual can either confirm or deny is accurate. Is that a fair way of putting it? You go beyond data that the state already has in effect on hand.
Correct. Many of these data sources that these vendors provide these services go well beyond it. We're not providing them our data in order to do this service. This is an independent service that they provide based on collecting data through a mirror of different sources.
Okay.
If they can collect the data, can others collect the data as well?
That's why they're always evolving it and they're looking for different data, right? And they're looking to mature it. So it's a constantly evolving technology to try to stay one step ahead of those people that are trying to collect more data about us.
And are other states using this particular methodology that you're proposing to use?
Yes.
Representative, excuse me for interrupting.
So I just want to be clear, the current status is we're not using that because we're fixing with.
Correct.
Okay.
We're doing the full procurement process to ensure that, we went down, and so that developing the RFP for those things and stuff, but currently that service is offline.
And I would just remind everyone of the timeline that we were under to get money out the door originally, and the evolution of how all of this transpired and how quickly. And that's why those capabilities weren't stood up in the beginning, was because of the way the pandemic rolled out. We just didn't have that amount of time in the beginning and really didn't, foresee what the future was going to bring at that point.
Thank you.
At some point, and perhaps it's not through your presentation, maybe through questions to Commissioner Harrington, to understand the extent to which fraud has affected us and what the imposition of the controls have done in terms of the ability to actually deliver timely services. But we'll save that as a separate question, perhaps after your presentation is finished.
And so getting back to kind of the plan, so that is why we're separating these two efforts. The phase one piece could be a separate standalone project, and is why we only asked for the initial $3.5 million to do phase one. What comes down the road, phases 2, 3, and 4, we're still in the process of doing research on. Commissioner Harrington and Director Wood behind me will, can also share that we continue to have meetings with all of the vendors that provide solutions in this space to understand that how they fit in and stuff, so that we can craft a better RFP to when we're ready to for the future phases.
Well, I think it's about lessons learned too, right? So when you think about all the other states that are dealing with the same thing, we want to see how they come out of this pandemic and what they're choosing to do as well. So while we have a number of solutions, we continue to talk to the other states. But knowing that it's 12 to 15 months down the road, we don't want to plan out all 4 phases right now. We want to do phase one that can stand alone and be a underlying technology that can connect to any of these different things that are out there now, whether it be a consortium of specific states or a specific another vendor. The phase one stuff that we're doing now will be able to stand on its own, and we wouldn't have to redo that.
Just for purposes of definitional purposes, how would you define Salesforce?
How would we
Define it.
In this instance, we define it as a platform that allows for the delivery of solutions through configuration more than creation of code. It's what's considered a low code platform. So it's something that will enable quicker to market, for lack of a better term.
But let me add to that. The way I would explain it to the committee, and if any of you have ever listened to our chief performance officer or former chief performance officers, Sue Zeller, talk about redundancy in government and the number of case management systems that we have in government being, somewhere up in the range of 200. This is really a case management platform. This is about, customer management and how we use those cases and share the data across that platform. So we chose a platform that was easily customizable, fairly easy to learn, and something that would be sustainable over time.
And is Salesforce used by other states in the manner in which you're planning to use it?
I know of one right now, yes. Connecticut uses Salesforce in the front end of the Department of, in front of their labor functions. And they're also in the process of implementing they're a member of one of the consortiums, the Reemploy USA solution. There's also, actually this afternoon, I have another follow-up call with a number of states, Georgia, Arizona, California, that are extremely interested in what we are pursuing here as an approach. And I think that what Connecticut has started, the way we're approaching it, has larger appeal beyond just Vermont, as far as a way to kind of separate what is the outward facing component from the heavy lifting that goes on in the transactional environment, what will replace the mainframe.
Well, and I think the fact that we've done this with PUA, the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, using this platform already, case management is case management, to me at least, in simple terms. And states like Colorado have used Salesforce for their integrated eligibility. So again, it's case management. It's so easily customizable. We feel very strongly that this platform is well equipped to be able to meet our needs now and in the future.
Senator Pearson?
Thank you. I'm comforted to hear some of this, and obviously that we're using this platform and already in other parts of state government would suggest it's road tested. It does beg the other question though, why are we a year later and having had such high profile challenges with the UI system, particularly around the website? Is that a question of money, or you needed time to get it on, all together? Or could you just help us explain why we've had to wait a year and a quarter before it sounds to me like turning on a system that we've been using elsewhere?
I guess and you may help, I'll try to answer that, and if I missed the mark, please correct me. We have been using it at the Department of Labor in the same capacity since, let's say, April of 2020. So it's not, we're waiting to use it now. What we're taking is, what we did was apply that platform in a very quick way in order to be able to serve Vermonters. And what we're doing now is we're going back, we want to kind of incorporate, make sure we have all of these things that protect Vermonters' data better with the identity proofing. We want to make sure that it's integrated better with the current mainframe that does the processing. We want to roll out something for the 25,000-ish employers to be able to interact with through a modern website. And, we want to do this all through, as Secretary Quinn explained, right? The single platform we're working towards so that Vermonters have a consistent experience, and we can strive for, no wrong door to online services. And that's what this is really starting to build upon.
Senator Pearson, you may not recall, but when we did our original CRF request, we did ask for this money, which was about a year ago for the specific first phase. And it got cut from the appropriation at that time.
I think Commissioner Harrington had a comment to add.
It was the exact same thing in June of 2020. We did propose this, and at the time it did not get authorized.
Okay.
And is this
How do we know it's the right amount? How do we know it's the right amount of money?
So for phase one, we did what was called an RFI, a request for information, to collect from those vendors that work in this space their best estimates without obviously tipping their hand. And so what we've done is our estimates, that 3.5 million request was based on kind of the mean of those responses. So we feel pretty confident that in the current environment that will be successful in phase one.
One of our project planning steps that happens with every single project is a form called the IT ABC form, which is really the business case and the sign off of what the scope is and the financial pieces of it. So we plan out not only what we estimate from RFIs and things like that, but also on the state side, what it's going to take for resources, and forecast out what we expect operational costs will be in the future. So we have a good idea, not always perfect, but a good idea of what the life cycle cost of the solution will be.
Senator Pearson, did you have another question or an add-on?
No, I'm okay. Thank you.
Okay. What could go wrong?
So for me, I'm looking at I'm looking at the current situation around the world, right, with variants, and whether or not those affect Vermont, and whether or not we're put in a situation of things closing down. I don't expect that, but what could go wrong, right? And the Department of Labor having to ramp back up and meet the needs of high volumes of people. That could potentially cause a pause in the project and cause us to move resources to meet those needs at that time. That's probably front of mind, just because of where we've been the past 17 or 18 months.
So I'm going to follow up on that. So so let's say that happens in the next month. And, what is our challenge there? So I'm hearing you say, we would need to move resources to deal with that. I mean, would it be the same? It wouldn't be the same experience as last year.
No, I think we've certainly made gains. Again, I don't think that will happen. Vermont is 85% vaccinated.
So something else could happen. So let's just say, that we have to ramp up unemployment.
It would be a slip of the timeline.
Would we be able to serve Vermonters? So, and what would be the challenge in serving Vermonters with where we're at right now?
With the current environment?
Yes.
I think we have learned a lot, and I think Commissioner Harrington can speak to that. We've evolved the tools that are in place now. So we're not going to be starting from zero, right, at this next, if anything like that happens. And as the pandemic progressed, we did things to try and make our environment better, right? We moved the mainframe from operating on a piece of hardware at Green Mountain Drive to our vendor, Blue Hill, in their data center for reliability sake. That doesn't help with the age of the code, but it helps with the age of the hardware. We also implemented our integration platform so that managing, connecting the data, we've not just kind of responded initially and then said, okay, we've continued to mature that. And I think what we'll be starting from is that position of, if there is something, whatever the next something is, of like 70% of the way to ideal, right? Where we've been building on it. We mature the continued work to do the identity proofing for Vermonters as part of that. So that aside, we still have the core functionality runs on that 50-year-old mainframe application that is labor intensive to maintain.
And phase one is not changing that. Phase one is just the front door. So,
Yeah.
right. Okay. So,
I'm sorry.
I think my question is, actually I hear this. So if we have something, if something were to occur and we needed to ramp up, we could. The challenge would be in continuing to integrate the modernization and phase one, but we could serve Vermonters is what you're saying.
Correct.
Can I ask the commissioner the same? And so, Commissioner, would you just, I don't know if you need to identify yourself, but
Sure.
do you say the
For
same?
record, Michael Harrington, Commissioner, Vermont Department of Labor. Could we serve Vermonters? Yes. Could we serve them well? Not great. I mean, our experience is that we can add staffing. We have systems in place that can handle the load. But we still run into the same problems of having a stable core system that doesn't fail on a regular basis weekly. And without this expanded user interface, we're hampered in the ability for people to self-service their claim or log on and see a status of their claim, all those things that aren't available right now through our regular portal. So again, can we handle the load? Yes, but it would not be seamless, and it wouldn't be focused again on the user. It would be more about how do we process this large number of claims coming through the system.
Well, as you're doing phase one at this point, at the end of phase one, when that is completed, will the user see anything different?
So my understanding, and I don't mean to speak for the agency, but the expectation is that phase one is all about the user, whether the user is the claimant or the user is the employer. So it would be a completely different look, tone, and feel to.
But the underlying problem is still the same as it was before in terms of the fragility of the system. Is that a fair
And so
statement?
we operate essentially to very basic high level two systems. There's the core system that determines eligibility and processes claims, and the various claimant portals that we have, which is the interface between the system that's processing the claim and how the user interacts with the system. So when they log on to file their weekly claim, how we communicate with them, what types of status updates they get. So the idea would be that the part that they interact with is the phase one project, because that was the most significant one. It's a shorter timeline to implement that phase one than it will be 2, 3, and 4, but it's focused on the individual. It's focused on the user in that case.
Can we talk about timeline for a second, phase one? What's the timeline for phase one?
Based on the RFI response stuff, we're planning 12 to 15 months.
Okay. And then of the remaining phases, what does that look like? Based on what you know right now, and I realize you haven't.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I believe it was 3 years.
Yeah, so along that line, just really briefly, why are we doing the front door before we're doing all the, in my, the way I think about this project, as opposed to the mainframe and all of the pieces behind it, so which is what is really aged? What is the value? What is the
How
value?
about I start and then you round it out? A couple. One is the front door feels. I had the privilege of going down and helping Department of Labor on a couple of instances during the pandemic. And one of the biggest challenges was the communications to the constituents. The claimant didn't know where they were in the process. And that was what drove so much of whether it was the phone traffic, the follow-up, or even to yourselves. And it feels like addressing that so that a majority can self-serve and at least understand where they are in the process without just feeling not, having no information would help alleviate a lot of the struggles we went through. The second aspect of it is that I was on a call just late last week. I know Commissioner Harrington was. There was $2 billion specifically earmarked for the U.S. Department of Labor for administration, of which the National Association of State Workforce Administrators, let me get that right, is working to try and get that to come directly to states to help with modernization. So it feels like we weren't the only ones to struggle with this. So if we can focus on some of the more immediate pain points for Vermonters, in the claimants, while we see if there is other opportunities that are going to come from this, Vermont will be better positioned than striking out on their own while that part is developing.
Can you give me some sense of the time frame of that national conversation? I know that can be challenging, but some range, best case, worst case. A worst case would be never, I assume. But
yeah, worst case would be never. I don't know, because they're just last week we're gathering the feedback from the states to provide to the USDOL. So it's the conversation is beginning as to what can happen at that level.
Okay, wait a second. So my question was, why did we choose to go with the front door as opposed to everything behind? And that was one of the reasons that you pointed to is this national conversation, but you're telling me that's just started.
It has, but what we're hopeful for is that over the course of the next 12 months, that will become clearer, right? And we're going to be able to see while we're doing phase one and we're preparing to go to phase two, will we have more options? Will there be different funding sources, right? And so that's those subsequent phases 2, 3, and 4 will be the ones that will be influenced by that national conversation. So the 12 months while we're doing phase one allows that conversation to mature.
When did we make the decision to focus on? We did this last year, right? To focus on the.
Correct.
So why did we make the decision last year? So it wasn't this conversation that we're anticipating happening now.
Agreed. For all of the reasons the Deputy Secretary mentioned around the user experience, but also if you remember where we were with the consortium, ending the consortium, the governor chose, and said, this isn't working.
That was just before.
That was just right before the pandemic. The month before. We hadn't even signed the papers formally exiting that consortium. We did the right thing. They still don't have a working product. That's the second consortium that we were in. The first one we got out over a decade ago, and they still don't have a working product. So what we want to do, fix the user experience, but make sure that we have a well thought out plan that's the best for Vermont. Whether that's exactly what the Department of Labor wants out of a consortium or our own product. We want to make sure we know what the other states are doing coming out of this pandemic, as well as what's best for Vermont and bringing that forward.
So the back end is something that you all have anticipated is something you'll be collaborating with other states on at some point, or we've tried to twice
Right.
and anticipating again, and now we're seeing that federal conversation
I don't think
happening.
that we're opposed to doing it again, but we want it well thought out. We want to make sure that we look across the board. As I think the Deputy Secretary has said, we've looked at a number of products, talked to a number of different states. We're trying to understand what everyone's doing coming out of this pandemic, and we need extra time for that. So rather than waiting on everything, this is an important piece, the user experience, right? The phone calls that we get, the phone calls that you get, addressing those and making sure that our clients, our, Vermont residents understand where they are in the process.
Well, one of the things, though, that we've heard a lot during the course of this is that the UI system itself is very fragile. The ability to maintain it is difficult. Changes that get imposed through legislation federally or locally are difficult to implement and could cause catastrophic failure if they're not done and done well. The question is, the longer that we wait to do it, the more that doesn't get better. And when I asked the question of what could go wrong, that was really kind of the core of my question. Not just what could go wrong in phase one, but what could go wrong in the entire project based on the kind of timeline that we're looking at. And that's what, I'd appreciate it to the extent that you or Commissioner Harrington could address. That's my question. And it also goes to the question that all of these consortiums seem to fail and have failed for a decade. Has anybody got this right?
I'll let Sean address that. It's you to address the second time.
So the first is, has there been I would say the Reemploy USA Consortium has been the one that is the closest to, that has been successful. And that one started with the state of Mississippi, where they actually built the product and then went out and found other states that wanted to adopt it. So it was not the states pooling their money to begin with and start from scratch developing a product. Nobody has been successful in doing that yet. So getting back to then your question about what could fail, yes, it is likely, it is a challenge is going to be to continue to maintain that mainframe. There is no doubt about it. But at the same time, we've looked at putting all of the eggs into a single basket, right? And the reason we're dealing with that mainframe is all the deferred maintenance that was, why maintain code if you're going to replace it with a product that you're going to get from a consortium that we were a part of before, right? And so when that fell apart, you're looking at 3 or 4 years of saying, well, why do we want to make this enhancement? Why do we want to make that enhancement? Because the product is going away. So we feel we've got to do something, right? We've got to make a start. And this is our way of getting a start on that road that is lower risk than trying to do one big bang project implementation that we've seen has not been successful or has been very limited success across the country.
Commissioner Harrington?
I was just going to add from the business side to why start with the Claimant Portal. One, we've got to start somewhere. I think we all agree the entire system needs to be replaced. The part that holds claimants up in the process and the part that provides the most risk to claimants is the front end, the part they interface with. So one, from a security perspective, when we're talking about identity theft and fraudulent claims, it starts at the application level, the Claimant Portal level. And then when we talk about how to move claims through the process, that it all funnels back to the user interface, because that's where they're providing Q&A back and forth with us to help resolve issues and problems on their claim. So, the core system is obviously high concern for us. It's the oldest piece of technology we have. But for the most part, when it comes to processing claims, it can perform the core function time and time again, which is determining eligibility and then processing a payment and issuing a payment. I think so from that perspective, starting with the front end, from a business perspective, I think will resolve probably a large portion of the problems that claimants are experiencing or problems that we're experiencing that are preventing us from providing timely payments, which is the ultimate goal, is that when someone files for benefits, we can turn around and issue them an accurate payment to an eligible claimant within a short period of time. And so having a more integrated but also self-service interface is really the key to getting there. I also wanted to add something around the Salesforce. So there are two pieces to the UI process. One is the initial application. So I open an initial application and then I file weekly. So unlike many other systems and programs across government, you actually have to qualify for UI each week. So we're asking the same eligibility questions each week and determining someone's eligibility for each week in which they're filing. The only part we've removed from online is the initial claim application, because that is the front door. It is the place where fraudsters can have already a suite of someone's private information to establish a profile. So what ends up happening is we were seeing a deluge of claims with 90% of those being fraudulent, and our team couldn't keep up with determining which of those were true people and which were fraud. And so once we have determined that somebody is that their claim is true and accurate, they are able to use the Salesforce platform in the PUA system to file their claim. So that is a technology we still use, and we still use our Claimant Portal in the regular system to have people file their claim. So the only part that really was removed for security reasons, but also so we can make enhancements, was the initial application. Prior to the pandemic, we took all initial applications over the phone. And I should also, just thinking of this, we removed the initial application from the public facing, but when someone calls our claim center, fraudsters don't like to talk to actual human beings. So when someone actually calls our claim center and opens a claim, the agent on the other side is actually using the Salesforce application. So it is still functioning, but that way the agent has been able to do some validation checks. And we still find that, fraud happens, but it went from 90% of claims with, hundreds and hundreds of claims coming in daily to now, 200 to 300 claims per week and 10% of those claims being fraud. So that we really flipped the scale in terms of the volume and the amount of fraud coming into the system.
How many of these, just out of curiosity, how many of these fraudsters have been caught and prosecuted?
The hard part, Secretary Quinn can probably speak more globally, but they're typically outside the United States, and what we're seeing is that they are organized crime. And so if we see it's one thing to have a transaction, it's another thing to see a pattern. So when we see patterns of frequently used bank accounts or frequently used identities, we then will forward that information to law enforcement, but it usually goes to federal law enforcement. That we are seeing, I can't even think of a case, maybe one where it was actually someone was perpetrating the fraud from in Vermont, inside our state borders. It's really international. They use various IP routing systems, so it's also hard to pinpoint their locations.
So basically, we haven't caught anybody.
I mean, again, that's a question for federal law enforcement. I know they have identified and caught large syndicates. I would assume that some of those syndicates have also been.
But we've obviously lost money, have we not? How much
Yeah.
money have we lost?
I don't think we know that, because we can estimate what the fraud looks like, but really until we become aware of it.
Do we have an estimate of how much money we've lost?
I'm not sure. I would look to Cameron if we we have that. I mean, we know how much was coming into the system in terms of fraud. The question is, how many of those passed go and resulted in a payment versus, did we stop it coming in the door? Did we stop the payment from going out the door? So actually trying to identify how many of those payments went out the door and then it was determined to be fraud after the fact. That's the harder number to catch. I mean, certainly just based on national trends, it's probably in the tens of millions. I mean,
I think it would be interesting for us to at least understand how much money we've lost to fraud.
I mean, we know that
Certainly would be a
larger
driver in
states-
terms of prioritizing what we do in response to it.
in larger states, it's hundreds of millions, but we don't pay out that much in benefits to when compared to like New York or the state of Washington or California. And so it's tens, maybe 100 million, but again, those larger states have seen much more.
I mean, I'm looking at an article that came out from ProPublica,
Oh, they say 10%.
89 billion.
Yeah.
Estimated nationally.
Yeah.
In fraud.
Right. But we are right now processing about 6 million a week in claims. So where other states are processing hundreds of millions of dollars a week in claims. So our portion of that would be much smaller.
Right. Well, clearly the issue that I'm driving at is I'm astounded that we don't know how much money we've lost, which frankly is shocking to me. And secondly, in terms of how we decide what we do, the speed at which we do things, and the way we prioritize things, the economic impact would be a factor. And if we have a situation in which we're losing tens of millions and perhaps 100 million in fraud, that to me would be a real driver in terms of our prioritization. So that's kind of the core of my concern.
So I should clarify, when we identify a fraudulent claim that has made payments, we do track how many payments went out the door, but that's only presuming we know that that's a fraudulent claim.
But that was an issue that I think was raised before in our discussions, is that we had something like $55 billion in improper payments over the 9 years prior to the pandemic that we hadn't collected, the majority of which we hadn't collected. And what this says is that this has gotten exponentially worse as a result of the kinds of fraud that we're having here. And what I'm just concerned about is I'm having a problem grasping what we're doing about it. And perhaps this is something separately that is something that the committee may want to look at, because I do think it has a nexus to our internet technology, our information technology, to help us manage this problem. So I don't want to take the whole committee's time doing that. And I know the Representative Feltus also, I believe, had a question.
Yeah, and I can, when the time is right, we can share about the various fraud mitigation efforts that are currently going on. To the question about how much, we only know what we know. And that's the concern, is that I'm sure there is much more identity theft early on in the pandemic that was not caught, somebody who claimed benefits and then disappeared. And obviously what we can track are those that we become aware of. And the idea is making sure we're stopping it before it comes in, so payments don't get issued. Because once they're in the system, it becomes much harder for us to identify it as a fraudulent claim.
Representative Feltus.
Yes, I didn't have a question. I wanted to more offer context for the committee of why this language appeared in the budget, because it originated in my committee in appropriations. And we were, as you know, we had $60 million worth of projects that the governor suggested in his budget, and we reviewed all of those. We reviewed the ABC cases on all of these projects, and we ended up recommending most of them, but we put this one and the job link, and then the Senate put the AOE projects on, asking for further review. And the concern and these questions that we asked, about the appropriateness of the technology, the experience record of the vendor, availability of estimates, would the department have enough personnel to do it, that sort of thing. Those questions were geared more, I think, as our committee talked about, we were talking about the whole UI project, not so much specifically just this first phase, although that's of course what's in the budget is just the first phase, the 3.5 million. But this was at a time when we've all been talking about UI modernization and the aging, mainframe and, the dangers of that and not knowing for sure how to proceed with the big part of the project because of the failed consortiums and the new federal money that maybe was coming through. We were talking about that clear back in February. So not certain of how exactly we would proceed on the next part of it was some of the basis of this language and why we put it into the budget, because we still felt unclear about phases 2, 3, and 4. We weren't so unclear about phase 1 because it seemed to make sense, of having this first part that if indeed it could stand alone and interface with whatever got developed later on and could solve some of the customer problems that of course we were all hearing about. We weren't so concerned about that, but we still, just because it's related to the whole UI project, we still wanted to have a little more information, which is why we said it needed to come to Jitoc for a review. So that's the reasoning that it was there. Not so much that we were particularly concerned about phase 1. We were just expressing everybody's concern about the whole big system and how we're going to solve the whole thing over 3, 4, 5 years.
Well, thank you. The context is very helpful to understand that. And I think that's one of the things we've heard here today is there's still a considerable amount of uncertainty as to what the remaining project is going to look like over time. And I guess that becomes a question of at what point will there be better definition to address the kinds of issues that Representative Feltus has raised? Do you have any sense of timeline for when things will be perhaps better defined?
Yeah, I think we're going to work on that over the course of the next year. I think, and it may be less than that, but, we certainly want to learn from the pandemic and what other states are doing. We want to make sure we come out of this eyes wide open and that we're doing all that we can to ensure a sustainable solution going forward for the Vermont Department of Labor and for the citizens or the residents of Vermont. The context was extremely helpful because as I keep saying to myself, we've appropriated $24.5 million for the Department of Motor Vehicles without any of these questions, right? This system is going to serve on average in normal times 16,000 Vermonters and 25,000 employers, which is significant. But given our track record over the past 18 months with these specific technologies, these are really small numbers in comparison to what we've been dealing with. So thank you for the additional context. That is certainly helpful for us. But as you can see, and in the information that we've provided, we've been doing that background work. We've broken it into the 4 phases. We've, when you look at, and I'll remind you of the mess that we're dealing with in this architecture of
the spider web
lines, right? It takes a while, not only on the technology side, but on the business side to go through and make sure all those things are, all the requirements are pulled out. And given the last year, we want to make sure that we're doing it right. So
is it fair to say, though, that you have a high degree of comfort that doing phase 1, as you suggest, will provide an improvement currently in terms of the user ability to deal with unemployment, and also will reduce some of the labor intensity of what we do? That's item 1 that I've heard here today. And that second, regardless of what decisions you make regarding the phases that are farther down the road, phase 1 will not be a loss because you will be able to continue to use that regardless of what decisions you make with succeeding phases. Is that a fair way of describing what you've said today?
yes and yes.
And I'd just like to add that is one thing Commissioner Harrington and Director Wood can vouch for is I specifically asked vendors, right? This is our approach. We are using Salesforce to create a unified experience for Vermonters. does your system plug in, right? Is this going to be an issue for you? And they're all supportive of it, right? It fits within their technology architecture, at least to all the vendors we've spoken to so far. And it's actually a preferred direction for many of them. They see that this is kind of where government is going, is platforms like Salesforce, or specifically Salesforce, to manage the interaction with the citizens. And so we're specifically asking those questions as we're going through these meetings.
Representative Chase.
To that point, assuming worst case, like if Salesforce suffers failure, is that uniformity of connectivity applicable to Salesforce competitors or other platforms? Or is it unique to Salesforce and would have to be scrapped and rebuilt if Salesforce went under?
No, it is not unique to Salesforce. The architecture is, in essence, it's service oriented. So it allows for, you can separate these pieces and have ways of connecting them that regardless of what's on either side of it, the method of connecting stays the same, right? And so that's what we're validating, is that we're going to be able to, if heaven forbid something happens to Salesforce, only that piece needs to be replaced and will plug in with that the core system. Thank you.
So, understanding the additional context from Representative Feltus, my apologies, that really helps me support the outline that you've provided us, and that you're really looking at addressing the large scope at a reasonable cost to the taxpayer. And if we wanted to push the timeline, if we wanted this faster, it would either make it more expensive or it would reduce the scope or the quality of the project. So I think what you've laid out fits with what you framed as why we're here discussing this today. So I'm very comfortable with the project phasing.
As we talk about Salesforce as a platform, what happens if Salesforce goes bankrupt and goes out of business?
These things don't happen overnight.
I think we had some experience, if you remember Vermont Health Connect, we had a vendor where that happened overnight.
Yeah, much different type of vendor. Our platforms are all major platforms. You think of Microsoft as a major platform, right? The same, what would happen if Microsoft went out overnight, right? We would continue to use the platform until we could relocate our applications to a different CRM, which is the customer relationship management software, or the type of platform that it sits on. And there are others out there. We've evaluated those. Salesforce was the best one for us based on the usability and the skill sets that we have internally, but there are others, and Microsoft's one of them, as well as a company called Pegasus, which the Secretary of State.
Well, I guess my question is that in the contract that you execute, in the event that this goes forward, are there some protections that would deal with the fact that if this company went out of business, stopped producing, didn't continue, whatever the case may be, that A, there's some protection, and B, there's a plan B?
There are protections, and this is something that has been evolved as technology has evolved over the past 10 years with our procurement team, not only at ADS, but at a state level, and adding those protections, working with the Attorney General's office to ensure that lawyers are looking at this and thinking of those things, as well as the technologists, on what if this happens, what would we do? So on the technology side, yes, we do think of, what is our plan B? And our chief technology officer often refers or not refers, but recommends certain platforms because of either they're technology agnostic and we can move the workflows to a different platform easily, or because of the reliability of the company. But yes, we do both in contract terms and in planning, think about those things and put those things in contracts.
If I may, I should clarify, my question was not to express doubt in Salesforce. They've been around for the last century and they're probably not going away anytime soon.
Okay. Good. Please.
One thing I'd just like to add to the Secretary is that also, especially with the labor solution, the data flows through Salesforce, but ends up in the state's hand, right? So we're also, I'd say it's another measure in how we're solutioning things is to ensure that our data would not be held hostage in a situation that you described, right? So that information flows through, we manage it because it's coming to the mainframe, it's coming to processing internally and stuff like that. So that is another measure that we can take so that we're not stuck if something like that occurs.
And flashing in my mind right now is our independent review process, where projects over $1 million go through an independent review. And our independent reviewer thinks about these things and asks questions and ensures that we're thinking about these things and documenting these things as well.
Who is the independent reviewer as far as this project is?
It depends on the specific project. With this one, I don't think we've done an independent review yet.
It won't be until the
Contract.
correct.
Who selects the independent reviewer?
It's put out to bid. And there's usually a team of reviewers that review the responses, but we only have a couple of independent reviewers. Historically, there's 3 or 4 that really review our projects before. It's a pretty narrow scope, unfortunately.
Anything more, because I do want to hear from the comments from Dan Smith from JFO. Should we do that now, and then perhaps if there are questions, then come back to all of you afterwards?
Sure.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Morning. Good morning. Dan Smith, IT consultant for the Legislative Joint Fiscal Office. And for my testimony today, what I'd like to do is go back to the big bill, the items that this committee is supposed to look at. Okay. Go right through them, check them off, make my recommendation, and then answer any questions you might have. Okay. So according to the budget bill, before the funds are released for this project, a number of questions have to be answered. And I'd like to go through them. The first was breadth of scope. Has it been adequately defined? And my feeling is that it has been, that the presentations done in the past at Jitoc, documents made available to me through ADS, which once again, I want to thank them for their cooperation. They've been very transparent on giving me information in writing and verbally. We kind of know where this project is going. Phase 1 is the front end, the user interface, Salesforce. Subsequent phases to be determined. Okay. We don't know where the nationwide UI space is going to go, but in the meantime, ADS and Department of Labor is saying, let's at least fix the front end, make it easier to use, easier to maintain than what we have now. So I think that's pretty clear. Appropriateness of the proposed technology. This one, I think you might have seen memos from me in the past. I do have some questions about. Salesforce, I've got no problem with. And the question of, what if Salesforce goes away? Salesforce is not going away. It's got a huge user base. It's used in a lot of places, but it is a generic customer relationship system that's going to be configured and modified to be, in this case, an unemployment insurance system. Given ADS's experience with that, I don't think they're far off track. I would have loved to see more comparisons of alternatives. That wasn't really done. This was pretty much settled on as the solution as far back as the fall of last year. That said, in the normal project process, it does require an independent review for projects of this size, and that independent reviewer will be required to do an alternative analysis of what other options there are. So there is a checkpoint that someone can go back and say, maybe this isn't quite what we're saying it is. I don't think that'll happen, but there is a safety net for that. Experience record of the proposed vendor. This is kind of not applicable at this point because we don't have a proposed vendor. ADS had several responses from the request for information that I believe that they felt those vendors were qualified or they wouldn't have accepted their rough guess of what the project would cost. Again, that's something that can be addressed by the independent review. Reliability of the cost estimate, same thing. We really won't know the details of that cost estimate until we get to the independent review stage, when we've got a possible vendor insight. I will say that the cost estimate so far is based on the RFI responses, to the best of my knowledge. That RFI is extremely light on project requirements. So you may say something like submit form, file appeal. Well, if I was a contractor, I'm all over that. I could give you so many different solutions that will do that, but they may not be the right one for this thing. When they get to the RFP process, I'm expecting that the requirements will be more detailed. And so the responses from that RFP will be more valid and you'll have a better sense of what. Well, let me just ask you a question at that point is that ADS is coming to the committee for our approval of the 3.5 billion phase one number. If we give that approval, should that approval then be subject to an RFI that comes in within a reasonable range of that number? An RFP. An RFP, I mean. In other words, should there be a contingent approval as opposed to a blanket approval? You could do that. I hesitate to recommend too many checkpoints when some of those checkpoints already exist. The independent review is supposed to be that checkpoint. Well, if the independent review says that everything is fine, except it's going to cost $7 million, what happens? That's the point where ADS should say something's not right here and we're not going to move on with this contract, or come back and say, we're going to need more money. That's a function that I served as the IT consultant for past projects too, when we had that kind of disagreement. I expect that this committee is going to be watching this project closely no matter what happens, because it's such a high visibility project for Vermont. It couldn't hurt to say that that the Jitoc is going to continue to watch this project over time. Adding more conditions on the release of funds, I'm not sure would be productive at this point. Going back to the list of items from the bill, availability of dedicated personnel for implementation and operation. The documents I've seen from ADS do list the people that they want to have available for this project. The operation part is not addressed, or if it's been addressed, I haven't seen it. I don't think that's significant at this point, that the operation of the system, again, and Commissioner Harrington can correct me if I'm wrong, but the big lift on personnel is not so much on the IT side, it's on the day-to-day business of going through claims and things like that. Am I correct on that?
Correct. I think if we're talking about new technology, there will be a draw on the business side in terms of user testing requirements, gathering and articulation, script writing, things we've done in the past. So much lighter on phase one because a lot of that is pre-existing and given the system we're using already. But when we get into the main project, the core system, the draw on the business will be much greater.
I think that's a question that's really has more significance when you get down to phase 2, 3, and 4. Proposed schedule and scope of future phases. Again, I think this has been generally addressed. I will say I think the schedule for phase 1 is fairly aggressive. I've spoken to ADS about this. I would like to see a little more leeway built into that. I mean, there's already been a delay because of the funding. I know originally they were thinking about releasing the RFP back in July. Now they're talking about November. So I'd say let's keep an eye on that schedule and make sure that it is realistic. I'd rather under promise and over deliver than vice versa. Say we're going to get it done in 12 months and it's just not possible. So having gone through those, my recommendation at this point is that the funds be released for this project. I don't think there's a benefit in continued delay. That said, I do have a number of concerns about this project that I would point out to many of you. In past project reviews, I've broken my concerns down into 7 key areas, one of which is project leadership. And to me, that's the big concern in this project right now. And I'm not talking about the big guns, the commissioners, the secretaries. They're definitely, all in on this project. I'm looking for the person that is the day-to-day runner of this project. The person that's looking at the documentation, that's looking at the project plans, that's looking for the weaknesses, the what could go wrong if. I don't think this project has that person yet. I would like to see that person identified in the next several months. I would like them to be doing kind of my role of looking at documents going, hey, this doesn't add up. The most recent project plan that I got, the charter, said, we're going to do the independent review now, and then we're going to put out the RFP in November. Well, that doesn't work. I mean, you have to, first you do the RFP, then you do the independent review. I want somebody at the team leading level that's catching that kind of stuff before it snowballs into something worse. Okay. So I would really love to see an identified project leader for this project sooner rather than later. I think Mr. Harrington had a.
Yeah, I was just going to add for the sake of clarity, that I appreciate the review by Mr. Smith. I don't believe, unless I'm wrong, that you have spoken to anybody from the Department of Labor on the project. So we do have a product owner identified from our end, the business side, and I do know that the Agency of Digital Services has a dedicated project manager. So those two have worked together in the past. They will be working on this project together.
And that's fine. I'm looking for the person that sits above both of those to make sure that the project manager should not be the sole responsibility for his product. And the business lead should not be the sole, there's got to be somebody that owns this thing.
Yeah. So I think a sponsor, is that something?
Sponsor is very high level. I mean, so let's look at Secretary Quinn and Commissioner.
Okay, so somebody in between.
They are at the sponsor. They have ultimate accountability for the project, but they're not reading the day-to-day documentation.
Can you give us an example of some other project that has what you're looking for? Integrated eligibility.
Yes.
Cascades. She was the day-to-day lead. She was not, the secretary of AHS. She was not the head of DEVA, but she knew that project inside and out at all levels of detail. And she was the one that did the presentations to various committees of, this is exactly what's going on.
In this case, that would be our product owner. So again, Deputy Commissioner Madison, Cass Madison, oversaw the business side. She did not, to my knowledge, dictate or control the technology side, the ADS side. They worked closely together, but she was the product lead from the Department for Vermont Health Access. The individual we have is our Associate Director of UI, probably the most knowledgeable person we have in the state of Vermont with regards to unemployment insurance. What's that?
Why are they not here?
We haven't started the project yet. So at this point, she will, when that time has been, when we've been authorized and we'll move forward. She currently serves as the associate director, was before that, the assistant director. So right now she handles day-to-day operations, but she will move from that role into the role of product lead when the project is authorized.
Secretary Quinn.
And on the IT side, and as many of you know, but not all of you maybe, in our structure, each agency has an IT lead, which is ultimately responsible for the technology in that agency. In the Department of Labor, that position has been vacant. We are recruiting for that position, and filling in for that role has been Deputy Secretary Naylor.
So it sounds like I was not aware of the person that you mentioned. We've got maybe a new hire in IT. I'll leave my concern as it is. I don't want ultimate responsibility at the highest level, and then the worker bees kind of doing their own and nobody. You want somebody in charge. Exactly. Somebody accountable that we can laser in on. Right. So if the committee wants to hear more information on this, that's the person that would be testifying, that they really know the nuts and bolts. And I'm not necessarily responsible for the IT side, but is fully informed of everything that is going on the IT side. So.
Okay.
Thank you.
The next thing I'll say is, and it's maybe bad, but two people testified that we've got to get going. We've got to get something going on this project. And all I can refer to is when I hear stuff like that is, are you familiar with the Dilbert cartoon, an IT thing with the comic strip? If you ever get a chance, look up the one from May 9th, 1997. It talks about the risks of charging into something before you're quite ready. I'm not certain that it applies to this project, but I get the shivers when someone says, we just got to get going or we're not going to get anything done. I'll stop with that. My recommendation, as I said, is I would recommend approving funding for this project. I don't think the project is served by additional delays. I think there are enough checkpoints later in the project life cycle, such as the independent review, that if there are major problems, they will get caught. That's about all I have to say.
Based on timeline in terms of the RFP and then the independent review after the RFP is complete, what would the timeline look like based on what you know now for that?
So I believe they're calling for the independent review, or I'm sorry, for the RFP to be done in November. That was the latest schedule I saw. An independent review generally takes about 3 months, and Secretary Quinn can correct me if I'm off on that, but it's a fairly significant job. If you look at the legislation for the independent review, acquisition cost assessment, technology architecture and standards review, implementation plan assessment, cost analysis, the model for benefit analysis, analysis of alternatives, impact analysis, and security assessment. That's a pretty significant amount of work. It's going to take somebody several months to do that.
And then at what point should this committee take a look at where we are? What should the committee's checkpoint be?
I would say the completion of the independent review. At that point, the project should be raring to go at that. And it would just take the approval from the secretary, the commissioner to say we're off and running. And that would be the time that this committee could look at that and go, are we really as solid as everybody thinks we are?
Okay, Representative Sabelli?
Yeah, I just want to go back to your second concern about we've got to get going. I want to make sure I'm appreciating what you're saying. I mean, is it just a general concern that we should feel when people say that, or is there something? Okay, great, thank you.
This one is the idea of doing the front end first and then figuring out later what the guts of the system are going to be. There is a certain amount of risk in that, okay? Because Secretary Naylor said that all the contractors or people we've talked to said, yes, we can take that front end and plug it into our system, no problem. That's good. Even if he was wrong, okay, even if in the next couple of years, someone comes up with the beautiful, perfect UI system that doesn't use a Salesforce front end or can use a Salesforce front end. By the time that actually came to fruition, you're probably 3 to 5 years down the road. So at the very least, you're going to get the benefits of that front end for several years. Anytime you do the front end first, worry about the back end later, you do incur a risk, okay, because things could change. But over the scale of this project and the amount of money involved for the front end, I don't think that's a deal breaker at this point.
So my final question is, how much longer do we have on the back end, in your opinion? Range.
I have to go back to Senator Brock, and he's asked me the same question. Some things can go on for a very long time. And sometimes you just have to accept incremental improvements. This has been a serious problem for every state in the country. And as we said, nobody has really come up with the solution yet.
No one has.
No one.
In the country.
No, I mean, reemploy, the one that's mentioned is working pretty well. It has its weaknesses too. And again, more details could probably come from Deputy Secretary Naylor, but that type of product, it was working well within the scope of what it does. But when COVID happened and they had to do the PUA stuff, I don't believe that system as it was built out was really conducive to making rapid changes.
Okay, I guess it's not my last question. Why can't we go it alone? So I'm starting to wonder if we have like a tragedy of the commons going on here with, and no one can move.
We can go along. And there have been projects in the past that Vermont has gone. That is never my first choice.
Right.
Because first of all, I mean, for all the good state employees we have, if you look at it relative to those states, we don't have that many of them. So the amount of people it would take for us to design a UA system, soup to nuts on our own, and then get lucky enough to find a contractor that can really pull it off, that would be a huge risk for the state. In general, Vermont is much better served finding solutions that other states have done, other people have done. Okay, maybe we do some configuration, some modification, but we're piggybacking on somebody else's big dollars, big resources and stuff and getting the benefit. I would much prefer to see us take that approach.
So what I'm hearing you say, I think, is that you would prefer that we do the back end first, but that is not possible at this point to go it alone. I mean, we're waiting on some collaboration, cooperation, cooperative effort to emerge. And so and you're signing off.
Yeah, I think basically.
Okay, great.
That's why I recommend approval at this point. Do what we can do now.
Mhm.
Recognizing that it's kind of the tip of the iceberg. It's the more visible part. And what's going to lay underneath, we just don't know yet, nor does many other states. That should become more apparent in the coming years, and then you go from there.
So sorry, keep going. You can just cut me off.
No, go ahead.
So, Vermonters say, are you kidding me with this old system? Like, we have to replace this. Where should that ire be directed? So, I'm hearing it's not a good idea for us to go on our own, that we really need to be trying to work with other states. So.
And again, we're kind of getting
Where
out
the-
of my area expertise, but
Okay,
generally the ire of consumers are based on either the front end, which something is just so difficult to use that you can't
Yep.
do what you need to do, or the stuff that comes out of the back end. And I think we've heard some of this in the past year of, some of the notices that went out to people, the front end we can start looking at now.
Yeah.
The stuff that's the core of the system may have to come later.
let me change my question. I see the commissioner has his hand up, but maybe ask it more precisely. So what is blocking a federal or this collaboration of states? Why are we not seeing this emerge? Who can answer that question?
I think that's a question that Commissioner Harrington may better be prepared to answer.
Yeah, what is the problem?
So the struggle, I think Senator Brock mentioned this earlier, the consortium methodology has been around for a decade plus. What happens is every UI is not universal across all states. So there is a core part of UI that is federal, and then a lot of it is driven state by state. And so that is where a lot of the consortium struggle, because they're all trying to build a system that works in their state. And if you have 10 states in a consortium, that becomes a challenge. That was the challenge with our consortium as well, is that they wanted to, eventually the lead state wanted to design their system for their state. And we didn't feel like Vermont was going to get a system that actually worked for us. To the point of going it alone, there are many different options. I mean, the go it alone doesn't necessarily mean we build the program. There are many different vendors out there where states have chosen not to go with a consortium, and there are probably 7 to 12 vendors that do this and have done this successfully across the country in other states. So we can go it alone in that we identify the vendor that would provide us the best solution. Doesn't mean we actually have to have the developers on staff to develop the program from scratch. It just means we don't have to be part of a consortium if we choose not to.
So is that an option that's still on the table for us?
Yes, yeah. So the idea would be, and I don't want to speak for anybody, so feel free to jump in if I'm wrong here, but the idea is, phase one or part one, we can do relatively quickly in the scope of IT world in a year plus or minus. And I think during that time is when we, along with the agency, would be building the requirements, doing the RFI and eventually the RFP for a core system. And the core system, the RFP, I am assuming would bear fruit in the terms of having either a vendor submit a proposal or a consortium submit a proposal. And so we are looking at all those different options. I mean, we've met probably now with 4 or 5 different vendors that provide these solutions. Consortiums are also able to bid on projects. And we've talked with other states now about what they have seen, those that have either gone it alone or done a vendor system. So there are a lot of, I say there are a lot of options. There are about 10 to 12 options out there for states to choose from. I think the challenge will be that probably 2/3 of the country will all be looking to either modernize or upgrade their systems following the pandemic. And so it will be now more about supply and demand than anything else.
Where's the decision point for going it alone or with a consortium? So, because before when I was asking Deputy Secretary Naylor, when did we make the decision about doing the front facing as opposed to?
Yeah.
So where's that decision point?
So the front facing is a little bit different because it is a proven platform we use across state government. It is one where we're trying to identify a common platform for Vermonters across agencies, not within just the Department of Labor. And that's why you're seeing it in DMV or AHS. But when we're talking about the core system, it will really depend on the bids we get back. But there are vendor systems out there that have proven to be successful. I think in the end, I would share Mr. Smith's analysis. I don't think we want to be in the business of building, maintaining, and servicing our own system. I think we'd rather be able to rely on a vendor, hold a vendor accountable for not only providing a product, but then also maintaining that product under a service agreement. And there are ones where you pay incrementally. There are other vendors where you don't pay till the product is actually launched successfully. So there are also options there as well that may be more enticing to us as a state when we do the RFP. But I think to your question, the RFP, once we receive those, review those, score those, will be the deciding factor as to which provides the best, not just the cheapest, but the best solution for Vermont.
Okay. Secretary Naylor?
One thing just to add to that, even the one consortium that's been successful is the Reemploy USA. There are states that are implementing that are not joining the consortium, and there are states that are joining the consortium. So that analysis will come when we choose the technology, and then is it in the state's best interest? So are those states similar enough to us that we can share stuff moving forward? If we can do that, then it makes sense to join the consortium because then $1 buys something for all the members within that consortium. If we're dissimilar, then we're better off just implementing that technology and not necessarily joining the consortium. I hope that helps to kind of clarify because the consortium won't force our hand as to the technology we have to choose.
Just a question. You've raised, Commissioner Harrington, from time to time, the potential of catastrophic failure. And my question is, what happens as we're going through this somewhat lengthy process? If that happens, what's plan B? Is it lots of temps, Excel spreadsheets, and pencils?
So to your point of what could go wrong and Representative Sebelia's worst case scenario, the ultimate worst case scenario, which I don't think is likely, but the worst case would be the entire system fails and we actually rely on another state to process our claims. So we look to maybe a sister state, a neighboring state to process our claims. There's a whole host of issues obviously with that, but that is the worst.
Well, my question is, has there been any contingency planning done to that end?
So the contingency planning and the redundancy of the system has been worked on. So, you know, the fact that we have moved our application online, the fact of the matter is, in a worst case scenario, I think we could scramble to use Salesforce to manage our Claimant Portal, which is right now probably 20 years old. And so if there was a failure on the Claimant Portal side, I think, you know, we built the PUA Salesforce platform in 2 weeks, maybe a month. So again, there are things we can do there. From the mainframe perspective, you know, kudos to the Agency of Digital Services, because that system used to be housed in our data storage room on premises at the Department of Labor. And one of the key things we've done over the last 15 months is actually move it to an offsite location with multiple redundancies, which also is operating newer hardware as well. So, you know, the likelihood that the entire system crashes due to a hardware failure is unlikely. And we do maintain regular backups. So, you know, the idea is the potential there that we may go down for a day or two as we work to get the backups back online. That certainly exists. The idea that we would lose everything and not be able to bring the system back online is less likely.
Secretary Ham?
I just wanted to add also that one of the limiting resources to, or the risk is the aging skill set to maintain the code. And we've actually been fortunate to find a vendor that can provide staff that has that skill set. And so we've actually added 2 additional of those staff to our kind of augmented workforce to support the Department of Labor. So we're now 3 deep in that area. And so we're also we're looking at it from every aspect and doing what we can to reinforce what's there to allow this system to serve us till we can get to that replacement.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Pearson?
Thank you. My question is back to Dan Smith. We just heard Commissioner Harrington talk about standing up the system to allow self-employed folks take claims in a couple of months. And I want to ask you about the timeline, which you referenced being comfortable with. And I must say, for my novice brain here, 12 to 15 months, I think, was the testimony to stand up, something we have to alter, but is sort of off the shelf, a product that we're using elsewhere in state government. Sounds like a really long time. And I'm wondering if you could help me have some comfort and a little understanding, and how would I explain that to constituents who, you know, have been watching this problem in the news for a year now, and we have to say, you know, we're happy to be in a position where another year will go by until you see a change. Could you help me explain that and have some comfort, or at least help me understand your comfort?
Sure, and I think if we want to get into the details, I'll have to yield to Secretary Quinn or Deputy Secretary Naylor. But it to some degree depends on how much they're going to leverage the work that they've already done. And that's where the details would have to come from those people. But, you know, Salesforce is an off-the-shelf customer relationship management system, but it is not an unemployment insurance system. So there are things you have to do to make it act in the way that you want it to act. And again, I'll go back to the RFI. So we says, okay, we need to file appeal, right? Well, you've got to get a system that you have to define, what does that process entail? You know, what does the form look like? What are the actions taken? How does that interface with the mainframe, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? There's a lot of pieces under the covers that have to be done. It's not just a question of putting up a form, you know, and then off you go. There's business logic that has to happen there too. And depending, and this is where I have to fall back on Secretary Quinn, depending on how much work has already been done on that from the things they did last summer, there's going to be a fair amount of work to both define what a particular function is, implement the function, connect that function to the mainframe, test it, validate it, and you add up just all of the things of, it's going to involve people from Department of Labor who have other jobs that they may not necessarily have the availability all the time to just do it right then. A year for a development process of this type, I don't believe is unreasonable at all. If you try to do it too quick, you end up with a superficial solution that's not sufficiently tested. So there's more to it than may meet the eye when first discussed. And again, I would, with every IT project, I would love to be wrong. I would love to say it's going to take us a year. And then when they get in, hey, we did it in 6 months and it works great. I would much rather have that than the alternative of, hey, no problem, we're going to do it in a year, but then it takes 2 and 3, and you end up with a lot of disappointed people.
Mr. Harrington?
I would just add that my response was more to Representative Sebelia's point of if there was a catastrophic failure. We designed the PUA system. I think if we had to do it over again and we knew that people weren't waiting on benefits, right? Like developing and implementing the PUA system on Salesforce should have taken 15 months plus or more. What we got was a Claimant Portal Lite, and it still requires work on it today. It's not a fully functioning portal system even to this day. And the PUA system is not like regular unemployment. So again, to the question, if timing wasn't a factor, if people weren't relying on benefits during an emergency situation, the PUA system would have taken much longer to implement.
And have you explored the idea of getting the light version live so that 80% of it is functioning as you continue to perfect it? I guess I'd love to be confident that we're doing everything we can to be as speedy as we can, recognizing we need to do it well.
And I think that's something that may come out of the RFP process and how ADS and DOL want to approach this project. I mean, with many projects, especially an agile project, which you're describing this as, there could be various release points that, okay, step one, we're just doing this particular part of the user interface. We've tested that, it's live, it's good, we go live with that. So that is, upfront ready to use while you continue doing subsequent minor releases to get additional functionality. Those are details that will come out when they flesh out the RFP, the project plan, et cetera, et cetera. Ideally, yeah, you get some visible results sooner rather than later, but you don't want to sacrifice, a quick and dirty for speed. You want to make sure that what you put up is really what you intend.
And Senator Pearson, do you have a continuation of your question? Thank you. Representative Chase?
Thank you. We've talked a lot about other states and the diversity of requirements within states. What about other players on the international field? I mean, I know the US is a little bit weird, its own kind of island in the UI universe, but are there any other examples internationally that we could use or learn from? I
have done no research on the international situation. I'm not sure if Secretary Naylor has during the year he's been part of this project. Deputy Secretary Naylor, excuse me.
I appreciate it. No, we've not looked past what's going on in the 50 states right now. But we can take that as we go through this. I'm not sure if Commissioner Harrington or Director Wood have heard anything on the larger stage of outside of the country.
I think from a technology standpoint, there may be technology through international companies. Probably most of the vendors we're looking at are international companies like Deloitte and stuff like that. But TCS is another one. But to the point about unemployment insurance, it really is a U.S. federally designed and regulated program. So we have to build it within the confines of how the federal government expects us to administer the program. That a major, obviously, sticking point, if you will.
Okay. Dan, do you have anything further to add to your testimony? Okay, good. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate your testimony. From the committee standpoint, we've heard from ADS, we've heard from the Department of Labor, we've heard from JFO. Our task, according to the legislation, is to determine whether or not we approve the expenditure of the money, at least the first phase of the money, and with any conditions that we may attach to it. Are we ready to decide that question at this point today? Okay. Is there a?
Chairman Brown, I just want to
Comment.
comment, no, just one thing. The legislation refers to $4.5 million.
Right.
3.5 is for the UI and $1 million is for the job link.
For the Department of Education piece or?
No.
Job link.
Okay.
No.
Oh.
Then
Yeah.
DOL. We've just been talking about the UI portion right now, and that's the biggest piece, of course. But the budget also asks that we approve the $1 million for the job link program.
And we have not discussed that at all. Is there anyone who is here prepared to discuss that issue?
I can certainly speak to that. I'm probably going to be Secretary Dillner myself again. For the record, Michael Harrington, Commissioner of the Department of Labor. With regards to Job Link, the department for many years has used the American Job Center Alliance, AJLA, as the base system for how we operate our workforce development program from a case management perspective. So there are really three phases. One is the job board, the public facing piece, how employers post jobs, how job seekers post resumes, how they're linked up. We also use the second component, which is case management for us in terms of how we manage enrollment in programs and do case management direct to clients. The third part of that system is the federal reporting requirements on the back end. So as you probably remember, we've talked many years in the legislature about redesigning and redeveloping a more modern user-friendly system. There were some concerns back in 2017 and 2018 about a data breach through the larger vendor, AJLA. A lot of those have been fixed by the vendor, but at that time we started the process of how do we want to move forward with a more user-friendly job board and a more a better system for case management and reporting. So this is kind of the first step in that process, which is looking at a similar process in terms of an RFP, which we've been working to develop, and then an implementation of what would be Vermont Job Link 2.0, which would be either using the same vendor or potentially going with a different vendor. I think that's yet to be determined, but I think another opportunity there is the Salesforce, which we've talked a lot about as a customer relationship management tool. So that really is the project in a nutshell from the business side.
I'm just wondering if Dan had a recommendation on this as well, or if that was part of.
I had looked at this several months ago when it first became the bill, and I didn't have any issues with this project. So I would recommend.
A little different too to this project is that it really is a very different type of system in terms of it will be whether it's one solution or two solutions that work hand in hand, but it really will be software as a service. It'll probably function very independently. So from that perspective, it won't be anything to the scope and scale of a UI program.
And timeline?
I have to go back and check, but I think similarly, probably 12 to 18 months.
I was in the 18.
Okay, Senator Pearson, did you have a question?
Just an assumption that if you could verify, I would assume this project doesn't have near the security risk that compared to the UI piece that we've been discussing.
Correct, it does, because it is all part of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, which is a federally funded program that provides funding to the Department of Labor. It does house some PII, personal identifiable information, so social security numbers for individuals, but which was part of the concern when the initial data breach happened many years ago. But in terms to your extent and what you were mentioning, Senator Pearson, it does not have the same high level of information, whether it be tax information and so on.
It won't be nearly as much of a target because it's not going to be financial. It's not going to be
Correct.
finance.
Yeah, it doesn't have anything to do with finance or distribution of money. It is, again, if you want to break it into two parts, part one is really just linking job seekers with employers. That's the really, forward facing. But then when you get into enrollment in programs, it's, we may have, they may receive some type of benefit, whether it's a service or voucher, but that's not necessarily being distributed through the software itself.
And I could just comment that from the point of view of our committee on appropriations, we looked at it. We didn't have any serious concerns about this particular program. And it was, it's only $1 million. I shouldn't say it that way. But because it was with the Department of Labor and a different function than UI certainly, but we just had the same concerns about Department of Labor having the resources to be able to do that because they were overwhelmed with lots of other things. And would they have the resources to implement a new program, and recognizing that the existing program needed certainly refreshing, needed some updating, and adding in this portion about, what some of the eligibility requirements that were not in the previous program would make it easier for the front end, for the customer out front who's seeking information.
Okay.
So that was why it got included in that same 4.5.
Thank you.
You want a motion?
A motion. Do you have a motion?
Say, are we approving? Are we recommending?
I think basically what we've heard here today is we've heard obviously the recommendations from both ADS and Department of Labor to approve certainly at least the initial front end of phase one of this program. We've heard a recommendation for approval of the $1 million for JobLink, and we've heard JFO's review that at least initially pointed out a number of things. We've had a back and forth on that, but an overall recommendation for approval, although it's clear that there should be one or more checkpoints from our committee's position to take a look at this once we pass the RFP and the project review stage, and whether or not at that point we want to put in the possibility of holding off the expenditure depending upon what we hear. Because if we hear something, for example, based on the project, say the project is grossly underfunded, that would be one issue that would cause us to perhaps take some action, and the action may be to recommend additional funding. It may not be. Or if we hear something from the project review phase that this is an awful project that won't work. I don't think that will happen, but the question is, should we have some contingency based on our review of it after the project is independently reviewed? And that's a question for the committee.
I would suggest more just another checkpoint, not so much holding up the money, because I think the money perhaps includes some development money as part of that 3.5.
Statement.
The budget says, we need to release the funds. We need to approve releasing the funds.
Okay. Secretary Quinn has his hand up.
Yes.
I just want to throw out that when we do the independent review, we are in the middle of a procurement process.
Mm-hmm.
We cannot talk about those things openly. So if we want to stage gate at that point to review with the legislature, it has to be an executive session.
Okay, that's fine.
I move we recommend the release of the funding for the UI and JobLink systems.
I'm sorry, clarify what Marty said. Did you say we vote to release it, or we vote to recommend to release it?
We approve according to the budget, we have to approve the release of funds.
Okay.
So,
And that's the substance of the motion.
yes.
I second the motion to approve the release of funds. We good?
Okay. Any discussion?
Sarah,
Senator Pearson?
Mr. Chair, I'm not able to vote remotely, but I just want to express my support for this and also echo what others have said. I hope we'll continue to look into it, but not set ourselves up as a committee that creates more hurdles. This is, we need this to move as quickly as we can.
Okay, fair enough. Okay. All those in favor of the motion, raise your hands and say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And the vote is 5-0 in favor, and it is approved. So thank you very much for that. Our next item on the agenda is the Department of Education's piece. I suggest at this point that we take a 10-minute break. We come back at 5 minutes of 11.